The estate attorney's office was on the second floor of a building on Mercer Street that smelled like carpet cleaner and old wood. I arrived 7 minutes early, which is a habit I developed working construction sites where being late means someone gets hurt. I sat in the waiting area with my hands folded on top of a manila envelope and watched the second hand on the wall clock make its slow rounds. My brother was already inside. I could hear his voice through the door, low and assured, the voice of someone who had been practicing what to say for weeks. My name is Claire Hargrove. I am 31 years old. I have worked as a structural engineer for 6 years, most of that time on commercial and infrastructure projects across 3 states. I mention this not because it matters in the way people think credentials matter, but because for most of my adult life, my family had a different version of me stored in their heads, and that version had very little to do with who I actually was. My grandfather's name was Walter Hargrove. He had built a small custom millwork shop in Denton, Oregon over the course of 40 years, starting with a single table saw in a rented space and ending with a 12,000 square foot facility that supplied cabinetry and finish carpentry to contractors across the Pacific Northwest. He was not a sentimental man in the way people use that word. He did not hug easily or speak in the language of feelings, but he had a particular way of paying attention to people that made you feel, when you were with him, like the most important project in the room. He died in late September on a Tuesday, which he would have considered a perfectly reasonable day to die since Tuesdays were when he did his books. I had spoken to him 3 weeks before. We talked for 40 minutes about a moisture infiltration problem I was troubleshooting on a job site in Boise, and then for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. He asked whether I was eating enough. I told him I was. He said good, and then said he had some things to get in order. I did not understand what he meant until his attorney called. The call came from a man named Douglas Pruitt, who had handled my grandfather's legal affairs for over a decade. He told me that Walter had passed, that the funeral arrangements were being handled by my uncle, and that there was a matter of the estate that required my presence at his office. He said my grandfather had left specific instructions, and that he hoped I could be there by the following Friday. I drove to Denton from Boise in just under 8 hours. I had not been back in 2 years, not because of any single event, but because of the accumulation of small events that eventually make a place feel less like home and more like a problem you haven't solved yet. The short version is this: when I was 24, I turned down a position at my father's firm, a mid-size construction company that my grandfather had helped my father start with a loan that was never fully repaid. My father had assumed I would come home after college and work under him. When I didn't, when I took the engineering job in Portland instead, the assumption became an accusation that I was ungrateful, that I had been given everything and chosen to give nothing back. My brother, who had joined the family business straight out of community college, was held up quietly and then not so quietly as the example of what a real commitment to family looked like. My mother did not disagree with my father out loud. She rarely did. She had her own version of the disappointment, quieter but no less consistent, expressed in the particular way she changed subjects when my work came up, or the way she described me to people at church as our daughter who lives away. I stopped explaining myself somewhere around year 2, not because I gave up, but because I realized the explanations were not landing. The conversation always arrived at the same destination regardless of which road I took to start it, so I chose silence over repetition. I called on birthdays and holidays. I visited when I could manage it without it becoming something I had to recover from. I sent my grandfather letters when I was traveling for work, and he wrote back in the margin of the same paper I'd sent him, which was his way of keeping the thread going without wasting stationery. I also, quietly and without announcement, spent 3 years helping him. It started with a phone call in the fall of the year I turned 28. He mentioned, the way he mentioned most things, without emphasis, that the shop had taken on some debt during a slow contract year, and that the bank was restructuring the terms. He said it as a fact, not a request. I asked him to send me the numbers. He did. I looked at them for a long time, and then I started making quarterly transfers from my own account into a separate account I had set up, which I then used to cover his equipment insurance, 2 months of payroll during a particularly thin stretch, and eventually a portion of the note with the bank. I told him what I was doing. He did not protest the way I expected him to. He said only, "Keep your own books, Claire. Do it right." Then he asked about the moisture problem in Boise. I did not tell my father. I did not tell my brother. I did not tell my brother. I did not tell my mother. Not out of strategy, out of the simple understanding that it would become something else if I told them. It would become a negotiation or a grievance or evidence in an argument that had already been going on for years. Walter knew. That was enough. So when I sat down in Douglas Pruitt's waiting room on that Friday morning in October and listened to my brother's voice through the door, I had some sense of what was coming, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The door opened. My brother came out first. His name is Daniel. He is 4 years older than me, and he had the expression of someone who had been told something that didn't align with their prepared remarks. He looked at me with a particular kind of careful neutrality, the look of someone deciding how much of what they're feeling to show. "They're ready for you," he said. I nodded and went in. Douglas Pruitt was a man in his mid-60s with reading glasses on a chain, and the desk of someone who took filing seriously. My parents were already seated across from him, my father in the chair nearest the window, my mother beside him. My father had the look he gets in rooms where he expects to be in charge and is waiting for that to be confirmed. My mother was holding her purse in her lap with both hands. They did not greet me warmly. My father nodded. My mother said my name with the flat intonation of someone taking attendance. I sat down in the remaining chair. I set my envelope on the arm of it. I did not open it yet. Pruitt went through the formalities first, the legal language of how the estate had been structured, what assets existed, what had been settled before Walter's death and what remained. The shop, under a trust Walter had established 4 years prior, had already passed to a designated operations manager. A man named Russ Callahan, who had worked for Walter for 22 years and who Walter had made a minority partner in the business shortly before his death. That portion was not in dispute. What remained was the property on Arbor Creek Road, 12 acres including a small house where Walter had lived alone since my grandmother died, a secondary structure he used as a woodworking studio, and a piece of bottom land along the creek that a local developer had been attempting to purchase for the past 3 years. My father had expected that property to come to him. Pruitt read the relevant section of the will. The Arbor Creek property, in its entirety, was to pass to me. The silence in that room had a very specific texture. It was not the silence of surprise so much as the silence of a story that has just been revised without anyone's permission. My father spoke first. He said that Walter had not been well in his final year, that the decision did not reflect his intentions as he had expressed them to the family, and that he intended to explore what legal options were available. He said this with the measured calm of someone who has rehearsed the sentence but not the situation. My mother said something quieter and harder. She said that I had not been here. That when Walter was in the hospital in March, I had sent a card. That when the shop had its difficult year, she and my father had given time and energy and presence, and that I had been absent in every way that mattered. She paused. Then she said that it had always been this way with me, that I took what was given and disappeared, that I had never understood what it meant to be part of a family, and that she was not surprised Walter had been confused about who had actually shown up for him. She said it plainly, without theater, which, in some ways, made it worse. Pruitt let the room settle before he spoke. He looked at me with the measured expression of someone who has been in rooms like this before and knows that patience is the most useful thing he can offer. He asked whether I had brought documentation I wished to include in the record. I picked up my envelope. I brought it to the desk. Inside were 2 years of transfer records from my account, each one annotated with what it had covered: equipment insurance, payroll supplement, banknote installment, and total. There was a letter from Walter's accountant, whom I had worked with directly, confirming the amounts and their application to the shop's outstanding obligations. There was a folder of correspondence between Walter and me, spanning 4 years, in which he referenced the support specifically and in his own handwriting expressed that it had made the difference in the shop surviving the slow period intact. And there was a letter, handwritten, dated 3 weeks before Walter died, addressed to Douglas Pruitt, with a sealed copy addressed to me that Pruitt had held. In it Walter wrote that he was leaving Arbor Creek to me not out of sentiment, but out of his belief that I understood the difference between showing up loudly and showing up in the way that actually holds things together. He wrote that the property had meaning to him, that money could not reduce, and that he wanted it held by someone who would not sell it the first time the number got interesting. He also wrote, in the last paragraph, that he hopes the family would find a way to understand one another eventually, but that he was not going to arrange his estate around a hope he couldn't verify. Pruitt read the relevant sections aloud. My father's expression went through several stages that I did not follow closely. My mother turned to look at me in the way you look at someone when a fact you were certain of has just been removed from the table. My brother, who had come back into the room quietly sometime during the reading, stood near the door with his arms crossed. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was smaller than his usual one, that he hadn't known any of this. I looked at him. I told him that was accurate. My father said that professional support for a business was not the same as being present in a family, that money did not substitute for a daughter who came home. I told him I agreed with him. I also told him that for 3 years I had been present in the way the situation required, and that if anyone had asked me directly what I was doing with my time or my income or my attention, I would have told them. No one had asked. There was a particular silence that followed that sentence. Pruitt moved things along as attorneys do, efficiently and without drama. He explained the transfer process, the timeline, the steps for recording the deed. He answered my father's questions about contest options with the patience of someone who already knows what the answers will accomplish. When the meeting ended, it ended without ceremony. My parents left first. My father walked past me with the stiff posture of someone managing a feeling they have not yet named. My mother paused at the door. She turned. She said that calling me absent had been her version of the story and that she recognized it was not the full story. She said it in the flat, careful way people speak when they are saying something true and it costs them something. I told her I heard her. Then she left. My brother stayed. He sat down in the chair my mother had left and put his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor for a moment. He asked why I hadn't told them about the shop. I told him the same thing I had told my father. He nodded slowly, not in agreement exactly, but in the way people nod when a piece of information has just recontextualized a large number of other memories. He said he thought I had just walked away from everything. That was the story he had been carrying. I told him that I understood why the story looked that way from where he had been standing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he'd like to see the property, if that was something I was open to. I told him I was going out there the next morning and that he was welcome to come. He showed up at 8. We walked the acreage without talking much. The bottom land along the creek was still holding its fall color, yellow and rust in the flat morning light. The studio behind the house still had sawdust on the floor and 3 unfinished pieces on Walter's bench. A cabinet door. A frame. Something small I couldn't identify that had been started and not yet told its own purpose. My brother picked up the cabinet door and looked at the joinery. He said that Walter had taught him this particular joint when he was 14. I told him Walter had taught it to me when I was 12 and had been annoyed that he had to show me twice. My brother laughed. The real kind, the kind that doesn't require setup. It was the first time in years that we had laughed at the same thing in the same room. There is a specific kind of tiredness that lives in the body after a long conflict finally finishes. It isn't relief, exactly. It's more like the feeling you have when you set down something you've been carrying so long that your hands have forgotten what empty feels like. You notice the weight only after it's gone. Walter used to say that the truest thing about a structure isn't how it looks when it's finished. It's how it holds up under load. He meant buildings. He also, I think, meant most other things worth building. I don't know yet what my family will look like on the other side of all this. I know that my father and I have not had a real conversation yet. The kind where both people are actually listening instead of preparing. I know my mother and I have years of accumulated misreading to work through. I know my brother and I are somewhere at the beginning of something that doesn't have a name yet. What I know more certainly is that the house on Arbor Creek Road is mine. That the creek runs along the south boundary and is louder in the morning than you'd expect. that the studio floor needs to be swept and the unfinished pieces on the bench deserve to be finished. That my grandfather asked me, without asking, to understand what it means to hold something carefully. I intend to. If you have someone in your life you think you understand completely, a parent, a child, a brother you see every week but have not actually spoken to in years, I want to ask you one question. When did you last let them surprise you?